You've arrived at Cozy Side Audio, where dreams begin with a story. Whether you're studying, journaling, or just chilling, this one's for you. If you vibe with this kind of content, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe for more.
Cozy Side Audio presents Trick-or-Treaters from the Wrong Street. Chapter 1. The last candy wrappers crinkled in the bowl, a little pile of orange and black foil moons catching the light from the TV. Silas Grady stretched out on the couch, one socked foot nudging a plastic skeleton that had slumped against the coffee table sometime around 9. Halloween 2 played muted on the screen, the familiar knife flash reflected in the window behind him, a window that showed nothing but his own reflection and the quiet suburban dark beyond. Marin Hollow was one of those neighborhoods that looked like it had been designed for comfort. Neat lawns, pumpkin displays, tidy sidewalks where the trick-or-treaters had roamed for hours earlier. Now, at nearly midnight, the streets were still no giggles, no crunch of candy under sneakers. Only the wind teasing the dying leaves along the curb. From upstairs came the faint hum of a hairdryer. Mara was finishing her shower. From down the hall, the muted click of video game buttons, Finn refusing to go to bed. And in the dining room, Iris sat hunched over her phone, cutting together a video called Halloween at the Hollow. The Grady house was not haunted, not even close. It was lit by LED candles and the warm glow of leftover jack-o'-lanterns. But sometimes, especially around this time of night, the silence itself could start to sound off. Silas exhaled, reached for the remote, and turned up the volume just enough to drown out the creaks of the old floorboards. On the TV, the synthesizer score swelled. A masked figure moved through the shadows. And then came the knock. 3 of them. Slow, deliberate. A sound that didn't fit in the rhythm of the night. Knock, knock, knock. Silas froze mid-reach, staring toward the front door. He checked the time, 11:46 p.m. No way. Trick-or-treating had ended hours ago. The porch light was off, the candy bowl empty except for foil. Who the hell would Dad? Iris's voice floated from the dining room. Did you hear that? He grinned, shaking his head. Probably the wind. Or one of your Halloween sound effects. He pushed himself up anyway. The hallway leading to the front door was narrow, the kind that funneled every sound straight toward you. Each step on the hardwood felt louder than it should have been. He peered through the peephole. 3 kids stood on the porch. They weren't moving, just standing there, shoulder to shoulder, like a photograph. Their costumes were odd, not store-bought, not even thrifted. One wore a papier-mâché rabbit mask, its ears bent at different angles. Another was tall, draped in gray cloth like a ghost made from duct tape and shredded sheets. The third, the smallest, wore something that might have been a clown suit once, but the fabric looked stiff, almost metallic under the porch light. Each of them held an old tin pail. Not the usual plastic pumpkins or pillowcases, these were round, dented, maybe antique. Their surfaces caught the dim light in dull flashes. Silas blinked. Huh, he muttered, unlocking the door. It swung open with a creak. Cold air slipped in like water through a crack. Trick or treat, they said together. Their voices hit him as one sound, slightly delayed, like the echo of a recording. Whoa, you guys are up late, Silas said, forcing a laugh. You realize it's almost midnight, right? The one in the rabbit mask tilted their head just a fraction. Trick or treat, they repeated. Silas glanced back toward the table, only wrappers left. I think we're all out, sorry. He hesitated. What are you supposed to be anyway? No answer. The smallest one, the clown, made a quiet whirring sound, almost mechanical. Their head twitched slightly. Something crawled up Silas's spine. Hang on, I might have something, he said, backing away. He rummaged through the candy bowl, finding 2 sad little fun-sized Snickers bars. He walked back, smiling. Here, last of the loot. The 3 pails lifted, perfectly synchronized. He dropped the candy in. Plink, plink. Happy Halloween, he said. For a moment, they didn't move. Then, in the exact same rhythm, they all nodded once. Silas stepped back and closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, the temperature in the hall felt wrong, like the air had been holding its breath. He chuckled under his breath, a nervous sound. Kids these days, he muttered. He turned off the porch light and headed back to the couch. On the TV, Michael Myers stared from behind a mask. Silas sat, took a sip of flat soda, and exhaled. His reflection caught in the window again. The faint outline of the streetlight outside. The shadows of their jack-o'-lanterns beginning to gutter. He almost didn't hear it. A faint thunk. From outside, by the door. He frowned, stood again, walked back, opened the door. The porch was empty. But sitting right in the center of the welcome mat was one of the tin pails. He stared down at it. The thing was older than it had looked, rust blooming across its rim, its sides etched with scratches that didn't look accidental. He crouched and picked it up. It was cold, colder than metal should have been. Behind him, Iris's voice startled him. "Who's out there?" He turned. "Nobody. Just some kids." He lifted the pail. "They left this." She stepped into the hall, pajama shorts and an oversized hoodie, phone light pointed at the bucket. "That's creepy. Like cursed object creepy. Probably just dropped it." "Yeah, because people drop buckets on purpose." She lifted her phone to film it. "Oh, that's perfect. Creepy vintage prop. Wait." Her screen glitched. For just a second, her camera feed rippled, static lines streaking across the image. When it cleared, the pail on her screen looked different. The scratches had rearranged themselves into something like letters. "What the?" she started, but then the feed froze completely. Silas frowned. "Your phone, okay?" It was fine until she tapped the screen. Nothing. The image was stuck on the still frame. The pail, letters across its rim. But now the letters were readable. Eldritch Lane. Neither of them spoke. Then, faintly, from the street outside came the sound of metal dragging. A long, slow scrape, like someone pulling a chain through the gutter. Iris moved toward the window. Silas followed. They parted the curtain. Down the street, at the farthest end of the cul-de-sac, 3 figures stood under the dying streetlight. The rabbit mask. The ghost. The clown. They weren't moving. But the light above them was flickering, and each time it blinked, the trio seemed a little closer. Silas swallowed hard. "Okay," he said, voice low. "I think that's enough Halloween for 1 year." He pulled the curtain shut, locked the deadbolts, and tried to laugh. It came out thin. Later, when Mara came down in her robe, hair damp and skin flushed from the shower, Silas told her it was nothing. Just kids. Probably older teens pulling a prank. She believed him enough to go back upstairs. But when he turned back toward the front hall, he noticed something he hadn't before. The candy bowl, the one that had been empty an hour ago, was full again. Neat little piles of wrapped sweets glinting in orange and black foil. Each piece was pristine except for one detail. The wrappers were covered in the same thin, rust-colored scratches. Outside on the porch, the wind shifted. The jack-o'-lantern flame flickered once, then went out. The night was still again. But somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, 3 tin pails clanked softly in the dark as if being set down, waiting for the next door to open. Chapter 2. The morning began gray and unconvincing. A thin fog hung low over Marin Hollow, blurring the rows of tidy homes and uncarved pumpkins. The Grady house looked ordinary again, except for the tin pail sitting on the kitchen counter. Mara noticed it first, pouring coffee. She froze mid-pour, her reflection bending in the warped metal surface. "Silas," she called, not loudly. "Did you leave this here?" He shuffled in, bleary-eyed, coffee mug in hand. "What, that thing? Yeah, the kids left it last night. Some weird art project or something." Mara frowned. "It's filthy and cold. Feel it." He touched it absently, then withdrew his hand. "Okay, yeah, that's colder than the fridge." "It was outside all night?" "Yeah, but..." It's warmer outside than this. Silas, that's freezing. He smiled wearily. You want me to put it back outside, give it a timeout? Mara didn't laugh. She studied the pail closer, tracing one of the deep scratches with her thumb. The letters weren't as clear as Iris had seen on her phone. They looked like scrawls, maybe numbers. The metal smelled faintly like damp leaves and something else. Old pennies, maybe. Rust and rain. From the stairs came the shuffle of small feet. Finn appeared in dinosaur pajamas, hair standing up in a tuft. He yawned, then squinted at the counter. What's that? He asked. It's just a bucket, Silas said. Leftover Halloween junk. Finn frowned. No, it's not a bucket, it's a pail. Right, very technical. I heard it last night, the boy murmured. It was talking. Mara looked at him sharply. Talking? He nodded, whispering, like when you hold a seashell to your ear. Silas ruffled his hair. You had too much candy, bud. Finn didn't answer. He just stared at the pail like it might blink. By mid-morning, Iris was up, editing footage from the night before. Her phone had died overnight, which was weird. It had been at 70%. When she plugged it in, the screen flickered to life, glitching faintly, before loading her video app. The first clips were normal. Costumes candy her friend Jalen's haunted house. Then came the porch video. She froze the frame where the three kids stood. The image shimmered faintly, distorted. She zoomed in. The rabbit mask had changed. In the new frame, one ear was gone. The paper surface darker, almost charred. Behind the eye holes, there was just black, not shadow black. Her skin prickled. She hit play. The kids said, "Trick or treat." But this time, their voices didn't sound like last night's recording. This version was slower. Trick, or triat. And beneath it something else, a faint metallic scrape. She replayed it 3 times, but the distortion stayed. When she went to show her dad, the file was gone. Just gone. Silas had taken the pail out to the garage, muttering to himself about lead paint and tetanus. He set it on his workbench between a tangle of screwdrivers and extension cords. When he turned his back to grab a rag, the air in the garage seemed to thicken, a low hum behind his ears, like static. He looked back, and the pail was exactly where he'd left it. But something dark sat inside it now, just a few inches deep, wet, reflective. Water, he muttered. How the hell? He leaned closer. The surface was too still for water. And when he tilted the pail slightly, it didn't move. Yeah. Then, faintly, his reflection in the liquid, not matching his own motion. It blinked half a second too late. Silas dropped the pail. It clanged, rolled, hit the floor with a hollow ring. The inside was dry. He laughed once, shaking his head. Get it together, man. He grabbed the pail and shoved it onto a shelf. By the time he turned off the light, it was already back on the counter in the kitchen. That evening, the air felt different, heavy with that early November dampness, the kind that seeps through walls. The jack-o'-lanterns on porches had begun to sag. The street was empty except for the occasional car sliding by with headlights low and slow. Mara was sorting through the mail when the doorbell rang. Once. Then again, longer. A third time, too fast, too loud. Silas opened the door. No one was there. But halfway down the sidewalk under the streetlight, something small gleamed in the damp. He walked out, shoes crunching over wet leaves. It was another pail. Smaller, dented differently, but definitely the same kind. He bent to pick it up and felt warmth radiating from it. Warmth, not cold. He looked up. The street was empty. Yet as he turned, he thought he saw movement between the trees, a flicker of gray and white, the curve of an ear, maybe. He swallowed hard. Behind him, from inside the house, Mara's voice. Silas, who is it? Nobody, he said automatically. But when he looked at the porch again, the first pail, the one that had been on the kitchen counter, was gone. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room, the fog outside pressing against the windows. Finn had fallen asleep on the couch. The TV hummed softly, some documentary about haunted places that Iris found ironically comforting. Silas tried to laugh it off, but his eyes kept flicking toward the window. Some part of him felt watched not by eyes exactly, but by a presence, the way a dark street feels when someone's standing just out of the lamplight. The phone rang. Not the cell phones, the landline. Nah. It was a dusty relic mounted in the kitchen, mostly used for telemarketers. Mara frowned. Who even has our number? Silas picked it up. Hello? Static. Then a voice faint, tinny, like coming through a long tunnel. Is it warm inside? A pause. We're so cold. He froze. Who is this? The line clicked. Dead air. He slowly set the phone down, forcing a laugh. Some Halloween prank. Mara stared. Silas, that sounded like, I know, don't worry about it. But when she turned back to the table, she stopped breathing for half a second. The two tin pails sat side by side, neatly centered, filled to the brim with candy. Orange wrappers, shiny and perfect. Silas blinked. That's impossible. I took the first one outside, he whispered. I took it outside. Finn stirred on the couch. Dad, he mumbled sleepily. Don't let them in. Everyone froze. Silas turned toward his son. What? Finn's eyes were still closed. They're cold. They said it. Don't let them in. The wind picked up outside, rattling the porch steps. Then came the faintest echo, not a knock this time, but the soft ting of metal against metal. Like three tin pails bumping together in the dark. The family didn't sleep much that night. Mara dreamed of footsteps moving in circles on the porch. Silas dreamed of reflections that didn't belong to him. And Iris, half awake, thought she saw three shapes moving past her window, too tall, too still, too wrong. When dawn came, pale and colorless, the pails were gone. Not a trace left behind, no candy, no metal, no scratches. Silas went outside to check the porch. Empty. He stood there for a long moment looking down the fog-heavy street. Then he saw it faint but unmistakable. Just beyond the cul-de-sac where the road should have ended was a narrow lane, one he'd never noticed before. A wooden sign, half rotted and tilting in the wet earth, read, Eldritch Lane. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, there was nothing but fog. That evening, Iris tried to show her dad the footage again. But when she opened her phone, the Halloween folder was gone. In its place was a single new file, unnamed, undated. She played it. 3 seconds of static. Then the faint, slow echo of 3 knocks. The next morning, the candy bowl on the table was full again. And this time, every piece was wet. Chapter 3. The morning fog didn't lift. By 8 a.m., Marin Hollow looked like a watercolor left out in the rain. Edges blurring, colors bleeding into gray. The Grady house, normally bright and ordinary, felt closed in like it was holding its breath. Mara stood at the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring across the street. Everything looked normal. The Lawsons' wreath, the Porter's deflated inflatable witch, the flickering Happy Halloween sign that hadn't been unplugged yet. And yet, behind it all, something shifted, like the whole neighborhood had been tilted just a degree off-center. Silas was already gone for work. He'd kissed her cheek, made a bad joke about haunted hardware stores, and left without mentioning the pails. Iris was running late for school, a half-eaten Pop-Tart in her hand, and her phone recording everything like always. Finn had been unusually quiet. He sat at the table coloring, using only gray and black crayons. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Mara asked softly. He didn't look up. "Our street," he said. Then, after a pause, "But the other one's underneath." "The other one?" He nodded, drawing a line under the row of boxy houses. Beneath it, darker shapes appeared, the same houses, but bent, warped, sinking into something that looked like water. "There's a street under ours," he murmured, "where it's always night." Mara swallowed. "That's spooky." He shrugged. "They said it's called Eldritch Lane." Her fingers tightened around her mug. "Who said that?" "The kids. he said simply. They were whispering outside my window last night. Mara tried to shake it off. She told herself it was just a child's imagination, Halloween leftovers, and scary stories tangled in a dream. But the name Eldritch Lane had been scratching at the back of her mind since Silas mentioned it that morning. She couldn't stop thinking about that fog, how it pooled around the cul-de-sac, like water refusing to drain. When she got into her car later to run errands, her GPS refused to cooperate. The screen flickered between maps, losing signal, then reloading in fragments. Roads disappeared, reappeared. For a second, the voice in the speaker glitched. Turn left on Eldritch Lane. Then silence. She turned off the system, irritated but unsettled. The drive to the grocery store should have been simple: one turn, 2 stop signs, done. But the streets felt different today. The same houses, yes, but with small details rearranged. A porch light missing, a house number half faded, a fence where there hadn't been one before. At the corner of Pine and Hollis, she hit a detour. An orange construction sign pointed her down a narrow, unfamiliar street. She almost didn't take it, almost. But the moment she turned, the fog thickened, swallowing the sunlight whole. The tires hummed over cracked pavement. No other cars. No people. Just row after row of nearly identical houses, same shapes, same shutters, except wrong. The lawns were overgrown. The pumpkins were moldy. And every window seemed to be watching. She slowed the car, heart thudding. The air smelled of old leaves and rusted rain gutters. At the corner, a crooked street sign leaned into the fog. The letters were flaking, but still legible. Eldritch Lane. She pulled over. The engine idled low. Something in her chest felt cold. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Like she'd dreamed this before. She stepped out of the car. The fog muffled everything, soundless, except for the faint drip-drip from somewhere unseen. Her boots sank slightly into the damp asphalt. The houses were lifeless, curtains drawn tight. Then she saw one mailbox at the end of the lane, barely visible in the mist. It said Grady Residence. Her breath hitched. Same lettering, same dented edge. But her house was miles away. She walked closer, compelled more than curious. The air hummed faintly like static under the skin. As she reached for the mailbox, something moved behind it. A small flicker of motion, metallic and quick. "Hello?" she said automatically. No answer. Then, just as she leaned forward, a burst of laughter, high, childish, but wrong. It sounded like it was playing from a speaker submerged in water. She stumbled back, eyes darting. Nothing there. The fog rippled, but didn't part. She got back into the car, slammed the door, started the engine. The radio turned on by itself. Crackle, crackle. "We're cold!" She switched it off. The engine sputtered once, then died. Her reflection in the windshield didn't move right. The eyes blinked too slowly. Mara gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. Then, in the fog ahead, she saw shapes. 3 of them. Standing side by side in the middle of the road, buckets in hand. "Jesus," she whispered. "No, no, no." She turned the key again. The engine roared back to life. When she looked up, the road was empty. She didn't remember the drive home, just the blur of houses and the fog thinning as she turned onto Marin Hollow again. But when she pulled into the driveway, she saw Silas's toolbox sitting by the porch open, tools scattered like he'd left in a hurry. The front door was ajar. Inside, the house was silent. She called for Silas. No answer. The smell hit her first metallic, faint, like something old had been dug up. Then the static hum, subtle but everywhere. On the kitchen counter sat the pail, the same one she'd seen last night, its sides still streaked with rust. But inside it, this time was something new. A small brass key, glinting under the light. A note sat next to it, written in shaky penmanship she didn't recognize. Every street has its reflection. Don't open the wrong door. Her hands trembled. Silas, she called again, louder now. Iris? Then a sound faint, rhythmic upstairs. Footsteps. She climbed halfway before realizing something. The pattern of the steps wasn't right. Not walking. Pacing. She gripped the banister. Silas, is that you? The pacing stopped. Then came a voice, soft, young, familiar but wrong. We found you. Mara bolted back down the stairs. The pail clanged as she brushed past it, the sound too loud in the small kitchen. When she reached the door, Silas stepped inside, carrying grocery bags, mid-laugh from a phone call. He froze at her expression. Whoa, what happened? She pointed at the counter. Did you put that there? He looked. The bucket? No, I thought you did. I didn't, she whispered. And there's a key and a note. Silas frowned, set the bags down. A note. But when he picked it up, the paper was blank. That night, after the kids were asleep, they sat in the living room with the pail between them. The brass key sat on the coffee table, catching light from the TV. What if it actually opened something? Mara asked quietly. Silas shrugged. Probably just a prank. Neighborhood kids, maybe. Kids don't leave keys in buckets, Silas. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Then what do you think it is? She hesitated. I think something followed us home. Outside, the wind rose a hollow whistling sound through the trees. For a moment, they both thought they heard laughter riding on it. Then Finn cried out upstairs. They ran. In his room, the curtains fluttered, though the window was shut. Finn sat up, eyes wide. What is it, buddy? Silas asked. Finn pointed toward the corner. They were standing there. Who? The trick-or-treaters, he said, and his voice was very small. They said the other house was cold now, so they want to come in. Silas turned on the light. The corner was empty. But the shadows on the wall didn't match the furniture. There were 3 extra ones. He told himself it was imagination. He told Mara it was nothing. He even joked weakly that they were living in a ghost story. But when he checked the locks before bed, he found the front door unlocked, though he knew he'd bolted it. On the welcome mat just beyond the doorframe, a faint wet footprint glistened in the porch light. A child's size. Bare. And at the far end of Marin Hollow, the fog began to stir again. A new road flickered into being for a moment, like a mirage of asphalt and shadows. A wooden sign creaked on its post, letters barely legible. Eldritch Lane. It vanished again as the wind passed through. Chapter 4. The storm started sometime after midnight, a quiet one, more wind than rain. The kind that made the house creak as if it were breathing. Mara barely slept. Every time she drifted off, she saw fog in her dreams, a cul-de-sac stretching forever, houses repeating like mirrors. And always, at the end, the faint sound of metal scraping on pavement. Yeah. When she woke, her heart still pounded with that noise, and the shadows on the wall looked like someone standing there, waiting. By morning, the fog had gone. The sky was washed out and pale, the air oddly warm for late October. The neighborhood looked normal again. Almost. Silas was in the garage, sorting through his tools and muttering about miswired outlets and power surges. He'd been trying to fix the kitchen lights, which had begun flickering even when the power was off. House must have taken a surge from that wind last night, he said. I'll check the breaker again later. Mara didn't answer. She stood in the doorway with her coffee, eyes unfocused. Do you ever feel like the house hums? He looked at her. Hums? Like, she hesitated, embarrassed. Like there's a vibration under everything. I hear it in the walls sometimes. Probably the pipes, Silas said too quickly. Old copper ones can sing when the pressure. I know what pipes sound like, she murmured. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're just on edge. Last night was weird, I know. From the living room, a faint voice called out, Mom, the phone's ringing. Mara frowned. What phone? They hadn't had a landline in years, only cell phones, all charging in the kitchen. Yet as she stepped into the hallway, she heard it too, a shrill whirring, echoing through the house. The sound was unmistakable, a rotary phone. "Where's that coming from?" Silas asked, stepping out behind her. The sound led them toward the den, a small room they barely used. On the side table beside an old lamp and some forgotten art supplies sat a rotary phone, beige plastic, coiled cord. Mara stared at it. "We don't own that." Finn appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed. "It's for me." Before they could stop him, he picked up the receiver. Silas crossed the room in 2 strides. "Finn," the boy pressed it to his ear, listening intently. His face changed confusion, then fear, then something like pity. "It's cold outside," he said softly, repeating what he heard. "Can we come in now?" Silas froze. "Who said that?" Finn blinked, then held out the receiver. The line was silent, just a faint, wet static. Silas put the phone to his ear. "Who is this?" Nothing. Only the low hiss of empty air. Then a whisper, just for a moment. "We're waiting." He slammed the receiver down. They searched the house top to bottom. No wires connected the phone to any outlet. The back was sealed a prop, maybe, but too heavy, too real. When Silas tried to lift it, he swore he heard something shifting inside it, like tiny gears turning. "I don't like this," Mara said, arms folded tightly. "It's a prank," Silas muttered. "Some idiot neighbor kid with a signal jammer or something." Finn tugged on Mara's sleeve. "They said they knocked, but nobody answered." She knelt. "When did they say that?" He frowned, thinking hard. "Before, when I was dreaming." That night the storm returned. The power flickered, then steadied. Silas double-checked every breaker, found nothing wrong. The air in the house felt heavy, charged. Every sound seemed too sharp. Footsteps, creaks, whispers of wind through the eaves. Iris sat on her bed, phone in hand, filming another documentary for her channel. "Day 3, she whispered into the camera. "Weird things keep happening in the house. My brother says the trick-or-treaters are back, but Dad doesn't believe him. Mom's getting twitchy. Also, I think someone keeps calling the house, but we don't even have a landline, so..." She trailed off, frowning. The sound of static cut faintly through her phone's mic. "I'm not making this up," she said quickly. "It's like the air's glitching." Her phone light flickered and dimmed, then went out completely. The screen showed only one thing before dying, a single word, in pale text. "Listen." She dreamed that night. In her dream, she was walking down Marin Hollow, except the houses never ended. Each cul-de-sac curved into another and another, looping forever under a sky that didn't move. The fog was back, thick as cotton. At the very end of the street stood 3 kids, Clover, Ash, Rue. Their costumes looked soaked through, darkened with some oily sheen. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. The rabbit masks stared at her, papier-mâché cracking like old paint. A streetlight flickered above them, buzzing weakly. Every time it went dark, they were closer. One flicker 20 feet away. Another 10, another right in front of her. She tried to scream, but her voice came out as static. Clover leaned close, head tilting slightly. The voice came through broken, like a radio caught between stations. "Your house is warm," it said. "We can smell it." Then Iris woke up, drenched in sweat. Her phone was on again, recording. The video showed her sleeping and 3 shapes standing by the window for 3 full seconds before vanishing with the flash of the lightning. The next morning, the house was quiet. Mara stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter. The tin pail had returned. It hadn't been there the night before. Now it sat perfectly centered, water beaded on the rim. Inside, a pile of damp autumn leaves, red, brown, decaying and resting on top. A small brass key, the same color as the one from before. When Silas came in, she didn't speak. She just pointed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Another key." "Same one," she whispered. "Or it came back." Finn padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. They said it's the wrong street again, he murmured. Who did, sweetheart? Mara asked. He looked up at her, his expression almost apologetic. The ones on the phone? Silas picked up the pail, shaking it. A faint metallic sound came from inside, not from the key, but deeper, like something small shifting beneath the leaves. He dumped them onto the counter. Damp dirt and stems spilled out. Nothing else. But when he reached to pick up the key, he noticed the underside was engraved. One word, tiny and precise. Below. Mara met his eyes. Neither spoke. Somewhere in the distance, the house phone, the nut phone, began to ring again. That night, Iris couldn't stop thinking about the dream. She opened her notes app and typed, Clover said it's cold outside. Rue didn't speak. Ash's eyes were lights under the sheet. They knew our names. The cursor blinked. Then, without her touching anything, 3 new words appeared beneath her entry. Let us in. Downstairs, Silas unplugged every electrical cord in the house. He was methodical, logical, determined to disprove what he didn't understand. But as he pulled the last plug, the lamp by the window, a voice whispered faintly from the dark television screen. We're still calling. Outside at the end of the cul-de-sac, 3 small figures stood under the streetlight. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. But if anyone had been watching long enough, they might have noticed that the shadows beneath their feet were slowly, very slowly, stretching toward the Grady house. Chapter 5. By the time the sun came up, the storm had scrubbed Marin Hollow clean. Every blade of grass sparkled with dew. The streets were empty, but the air had that hushed, electric tension that follows thunder, a quiet so complete it seemed the neighborhood itself was listening. Mara moved through the kitchen like she was afraid to wake someone. The tin pail sat exactly where she'd left it the night before, water still pooled inside, the brass key glinting dully beneath the surface. She hadn't touched it, not yet. Silas came in bleary-eyed, rubbing the back of his neck. We need to throw that thing away, he muttered, nodding at the pail. Mara looked at him. What if it just comes back? He stopped mid-step. The question shouldn't have made sense, and yet it did. Then, he said after a long pause, we'll keep throwing it away. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than admitting the truth. Neither of them believed the pail would stay gone. Upstairs, Iris sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop open, combing through the videos she'd recorded in the last few days. Every clip from Halloween night had corrupted somehow, colors bleeding, sound twisting into low, static hums. In one, she thought she saw a flicker of something in the corner of the frame. 3 blurred shapes outside her window, faces indistinct. She leaned closer. The shapes twitched, not the way digital artifacts do, but the way things move when they notice you watching. Iris slammed the laptop shut. Her phone buzzed beside her. Unknown number. Did you find the key yet? She dropped the phone. It hit the bedspread with a soft thud and went dark. Downstairs, Finn had found the key. He was crouched on the floor beside the pail, dipping his fingers into the cold water to fish it out. It's heavy, he said softly. Heavier than before. Mara rushed over. Finn, don't! But it was too late. He held the brass key in his palm, dripping, staring at it like he recognized it from somewhere. It's ours, he said. Mara crouched beside him. What do you mean? Finn looked up at her, eyes wide. It fits the cabinet in the basement, the one behind Dad's workbench. Mara felt her stomach drop. What cabinet? The one with the door that doesn't open. Silas was already down there when they came downstairs, flashlight in hand, trying to prove there was nothing strange about an old lock on an old cabinet. The basement smelled like dust and cold stone. Concrete floor, low ceiling. Wires hung in lazy loops from exposed beams. The air felt too still, as if it had been waiting a long time for someone to come down. The cabinet in question sat tucked into the far wall. Metal, old, its hinges caked with rust. Silas ran his hand along the latch, frowning. This thing doesn't even have a lock. Try the key, Mara said quietly. He hesitated. Then, because not trying would have felt worse, he slid the brass key into the tiny slot that shouldn't have existed. It turned easily. Click. The latch released. For a moment, no one moved. Then Silas swung the door open. Inside were boxes, dusty, water-stained, tied with brittle string. The smell of age and mildew rolled out like breath from a tomb. Mara reached in and lifted one of the boxes. It was lighter than it looked. On the lid, written in faded ink, Hallows Eve, 1961. Someone stored decorations down here, Silas said. His voice sounded too loud in the close air. Old homeowners, maybe. He pulled the string loose, opened the box. Inside, photographs. Stacks of them. Glossy, square-edged, yellowing around the borders. He picked up the top one and froze. 3 children stared back at him, standing on a porch that looked disturbingly familiar. A girl in a papier-mâché rabbit mask. A taller figure in a ghost costume made of duct tape and tattered sheets. A smaller one in a patchwork clown suit. The same costumes. Exactly the same. Mara stepped closer. That can't be. I know, Silas whispered. He shuffled through the stack. Every photo was the same. The 3 children standing in different driveways, different houses, always staring straight at the camera. Sometimes smiling, sometimes not. In one, the background was unmistakable, the Grady house. Or rather, a version of it, older, the paint a different color, but the shape identical. Silas, Mara said softly, look at the date. He did. October 31st, 1961. 64 years ago. He let the photos slip from his hand. That evening, Iris came down to the basement to film her own footage. Okay, she whispered into the lens. These photos are freaky, but Dad says they're just some kind of joke, maybe photoshopped. She panned across the workbench. The boxes, the cabinet, the photos spread like fallen leaves. Her flashlight beam drifted over the wall and caught something carved into the wood paneling she hadn't noticed before. Letters, scratched deep. Don't let them in. Iris backed away slowly. Oh, hell no. Then the flashlight flickered. The beam dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. She aimed it at the floor, and for a split second saw something metallic glint between the cracks of the floorboards like wires, but moving. The light went out. In the darkness, she heard it. A faint scrape. 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 Metal on wood, coming from directly beneath her feet. Upstairs, Silas was sitting on the couch, the photos scattered across the coffee table. He was tracing one image with his finger, the one with their house. In the picture, a man stood on the porch behind the 3 trick-or-treaters. His face was turned away, but something about the shape of his shoulders looked familiar. Who took these? Mara asked quietly. Doesn't matter, he said. Someone's playing games. I'll figure out who. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the window. Outside, the fog was rolling back in. Later that night, Iris couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the house creak, to the faint rattle of wind against the siding. Around midnight, she heard it again, a noise under the floorboards. Not mice, not pipes, something dragging. She turned on her phone flashlight and held it low to the carpet. The sound stopped. Then tap. Once. Twice. She whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the faint smell of damp leaves drifting through her room, though her window was closed. She switched on the camera and started recording again, heart hammering. Somewhere below, the scraping began again, louder now. Metal. Slow. Deliberate. In the morning, Silas found a new photograph on the kitchen counter. He swore it hadn't been there the night before. It showed the Grady family, all 4 of them, standing on their porch, smiling. But none of them remembered taking it. And behind them, half hidden in the frame, stood 3 small figures holding empty pails. Chapter 6. The Grady house began to lose track of time. Light no longer meant morning. Dark no longer meant sleep. Somewhere in between, the air in every room seemed to hum, the walls whispering with a faint, rhythmic throb like a heartbeat buried inside the plaster. Silas blamed the wiring. Mara blamed the weather. Iris blamed everything. But Finn didn't blame anyone. He just watched the shadows. It started with the lights, and the kitchen bulb buzzed, flared, then dimmed to a dull orange. The hallway lamp blinked twice whenever someone walked past it. And in the basement, the fluorescent strip flickered on by itself, even with the switch off. Silas set up his tools across the counter voltage reader, multimeter, wire cutters, determined to prove the house was simply old, not cursed. But when he opened his toolbox, half the tools were gone. He frowned. "Mara, did you move my stuff?" "No," she said absently from the sink. "I haven't touched anything." He rummaged through drawers, cabinets, nothing. The pliers, the soldering iron, the heavy-duty flashlight. All missing. "Fantastic," he muttered. "Tools don't just walk off." Finn looked up from his coloring book at the table. "They do if the shadows carry them." Silas froze. "What did you say?" "The shadows," Finn repeated like it was obvious. "They took your tools into the walls." Mara turned, half laughing. "Honey, shadows can't—" But Finn was already staring at the wall behind her, eyes wide and unblinking. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, moaning through the trees like a low whistle. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching faint flickers of movement that shouldn't have been there. When she turned off the lamp, she expected darkness. Instead, she saw her shadow still cast faintly across the ceiling, as if someone else's light were shining on her from behind. She sat up quickly. The shadow sat up a moment later. She didn't scream, not yet. She simply turned the lamp back on, and the shadow fell into place again, obediently, perfectly matched. For now. In the morning, Iris noticed something strange in her reflection. She was brushing her hair, her phone balanced on the bathroom counter, the front camera running part of her ongoing Grady House Chronicles. Behind her in the mirror, the door was slightly ajar. A shadow stretched across it, shaped like a person. But when she turned to look, the door was closed. The shadow was gone. "Okay," she whispered to her camera, trying to laugh. "That's new." She turned back to the mirror and saw herself smiling. Except she wasn't. The reflection's mouth curled just slightly upward. Then, slowly, the head turned not toward her but behind her. Iris spun around. Empty bathroom. When she looked back, the mirror was just a mirror again. Downstairs, Silas was tearing the living room apart. Extension cords, open junction boxes, half-coiled wires spilling across the floor. He was muttering under his breath, following invisible circuits like a man tracing a map only he could see. "This house wasn't built right," he said. "I've checked every fuse, every outlet, nothing matches the blueprints. Half of it's just wrong." Mara stood in the doorway. "Wrong how?" "Wires going nowhere," he said, shaking his head. "Dead ends in the walls, circuits that loop back into themselves. It's like someone rewired the house to listen." She frowned. To listen? He didn't answer. He just stared at the light switch, flicked it once, and watched the kitchen bulb upstairs flicker in response. That evening, Finn refused to go into his room. "They're in the closet," he whispered. "Ash and the others." Silas sighed. "Buddy, there's nothing in—" "They don't have feet," Finn interrupted. "They float." His voice was so calm, so certain, that Mara felt something cold slide down her spine. "Okay," she said gently. "Let's go see together." She opened the closet door. Clothes, toys, the usual mess. But as the light fell across the floor, she noticed something, a faint black outline that didn't belong to any object in the room. It looked like a shadow, cast by something standing just outside the frame of the door. She touched the edge of it with her shoe. It didn't move. Didn't stretch or fade, just stayed. Like a stain. By midnight, the lights were flickering in every room. Silas unplugged the breakers, killed the power entirely, but the bulbs still glowed faintly, like eyes refusing to close. He could feel static building in the air, pricking his arms with invisible electricity. Then came the laughter. Quiet at first, almost musical. Children's laughter, echoing from somewhere inside the walls. He turned, flashlight in hand. Finn, Iris, no response. The laughter faded, then repeated, looping like a recording. When the beam of his flashlight hit the far wall, he saw handprints smeared across the wallpaper. Small, damp, trailing down toward the floorboards. He reached out to touch one. The shadow of his hand didn't follow. Mara found him sitting on the stairs hours later, breathing hard, flashlight still on. "They're in the wiring," he said. "In the circuits. They're using the light." She crouched beside him, voice trembling. "Who?" He looked at her, and for a second, she thought she saw 3 small silhouettes reflected in his pupils. The kids. The next morning, the tin pail was gone from the counter. No one had touched it. But in its place, 3 perfect circles of dust, marked where it had sat, as if something had lifted it away with invisible hands. Mara stared at the empty spot, heart pounding. Then she noticed something else. The family's shadows on the wall, beside the breakfast table. 4 chairs. 5 shadows. Later, Iris tried to record again. She set her phone on the table, facing the hallway, determined to catch something. The video ran for 30 minutes before the battery died. When she watched it back, the footage was grainy but clear. For the first 25 minutes, nothing. Then, at 2:47 a.m., a flicker. A tall shadow crossed the frame, followed by 2 smaller ones. They stopped in the middle of the hall, motionless for several seconds before one turned its head toward the camera. Even through the distortion, Iris could see the faint metallic gleam beneath the paper and cloth. That evening, Mara went to close the curtains in the living room and froze. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, but when she lifted her hand, the reflection didn't move. It just stood there, eyes wide, as if listening. And then, so slowly she almost missed it, it lifted its hand to point behind her. Mara turned. Nothing. When she looked back, the reflection was smiling. The Gradys slept in the same room that night, all 4 of them, huddled together on the bed, lights left on. No one spoke about what they'd seen. No one mentioned the extra shadow that stretched across the floor, long and thin and child-sized, even when every other light in the room went dark. Outside, the fog returned. The streetlight at the end of Marin Hollow buzzed faintly, flickering on and off. Each time it went dark, the faint outline of 3 small figures appeared beneath it. And with every flicker, they seemed to be standing a little closer to the Grady house. Chapter 7. Halloween was long over. The pumpkins had collapsed into soft, sagging mouths. The leaves in the yard had turned from gold to brown, then to black mush under the November rain. And yet the Grady's house looked festive again. It started subtly, a plastic pumpkin on the porch rail, its orange grin warped and waterlogged. Then came a length of fake cobweb across the mailbox, a rubber bat hanging crookedly from the gutter. By the 3rd morning, the front yard was dressed for Halloween as if the night had never ended. Mara stood at the window, coffee cooling in her hand, staring out. "I packed all that stuff away," she murmured. Silas grunted from behind a newspaper. "Maybe someone's messing with us. Neighborhood kids." "Kids?" she repeated, "because it couldn't possibly be—" "Don't," he warned, not looking up. "We're not doing ghosts." But when he finally set the paper down, his hands were shaking. By dusk, the house had gone cold again. Every vent blew air that smelled faintly metallic, like pennies in water. Iris walked from room to room with a blanket around her shoulders, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Look," she said, pointing to the footage from the night before. 3 figures in the hallway, small, blurry, but unmistakably them. Clover, Ash, Rue. Silas watched it once, then slammed the laptop shut. "Enough!" "But," I said enough. "It's a prank, Iris. Someone's messing with us. They're watching to see if we'll freak out." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes, that raw, desperate denial, made her stay quiet. At 8:03 p.m., the phone rang. Not a cell, not the sleek cordless. The rotary? They didn't have a rotary. The sound came from the kitchen, that slow, deliberate ring, like a heartbeat made of static. Silas looked at Mara. "You hear that?" She nodded, pale. "Where is it coming from?" He followed the sound to the far counter, behind the toaster. There it was, a dusty black rotary phone that neither of them had ever seen before, cord trailing into the wall like a vein. It rang again. He lifted the receiver slowly. "Hello?" A pause. Then a chorus of voices, 3, layered over one another, metallic and childlike. "We're cold. Please, just for a little while." Silas's mouth went dry. "Who is this?" "We knocked," the voices said. "You didn't open the door." Click. The line went dead. Mara wanted to throw the phone out the window. Silas wanted to smash it with a hammer. Neither did anything. They just stood there, waiting like people who already knew the next sound they'd hear. It came exactly 2 minutes later. 3 knocks. Slow, measured, from the front door. Finn whispered from the couch. They came back. Mara moved first. She didn't know why. Maybe the cold creeping through the floorboards, maybe the silence after the knocks, maybe something deeper. A tug in the gut that felt like guilt. She stepped toward the door. "Don't," Silas said, voice sharp. But she didn't stop. She could see their shapes through the frosted glass. 3 small silhouettes under the porch light. Still as mannequins. Waiting. When she got close, she noticed something strange. The porch light wasn't flickering anymore. It was steady, bright. Almost too bright. She placed her hand on the knob. Cold metal. Almost burning cold. "Who's there?" she called. A child's voice answered, soft, static warped. "It's just us. We're so cold." "Clover?" Mara whispered. Silas grabbed her wrist. "Mara, don't open it." "They're just kids." "They're not kids." The words snapped out of him like a whip. Finn started to cry. Iris held him close. And then the voices came again, all 3 this time, overlapping perfectly, like they'd practiced. "For warmth." Mara's breath fogged against the glass. Something deep inside her, the motherly part, the human part, screamed to open the door. It was cold out. They were children. She turned the knob. The door swung open with a creak that echoed down the hall. No wind, no rain, just stillness. 3 figures stood on the porch, lit in pale amber. Clover's papier-mâché rabbit mask, the paint cracking, Rue's patchwork clown suit stiff with damp. Ash towering above them, the ghost costume fluttering slightly, though there was no breeze. Their faces, or what passed for faces, didn't move. Their eyes were just holes. "For warmth," Clover whispered. Mara's heart pounded. "Two don't have—" But she never finished, because in the next blink, the porch was empty. Gone. No sound, no trace. She exhaled shakily and turned back inside. And froze. Muddy footprints led from the open doorway, across the entryway rug, through the hall, all the way toward the kitchen. Small, bare, and wet. Silas's voice was barely audible. "Close the door." She shut it, hand trembling on the lock. The lights flickered once, then steadied again. For a long time, no one moved. Then Finn said quietly, "They're inside now." They searched the house top to bottom. Every room, every closet. No sign of anyone. But the temperature had dropped even lower, cold enough that Mara's breath misted as she spoke. Iris kept her phone out, filming. If they're in here, I'll find them. The footage showed nothing. No shapes, no faces. Just the faint sound of ticking like a metronome, buried somewhere in the walls. By midnight, they gave up. Everyone returned to the living room exhausted, hearts still pounding. That's when the TV turned on. Static. White noise. Then, a flash of color, a brief frame showing 3 children standing in the Grady's front yard holding their tin pail. The timestamp on the footage was tomorrow. The screen went black. Mara pressed her hands to her face. We can't stay here. We're not leaving our home, Silas snapped. Home, she said, looking around. You think this is still ours? Before he could answer, the air shifted a subtle pressure, like the house exhaling. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of something dragging across the floor. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Finn clutched Iris's arm. They're cold, Mara whispered. What? They said they just want warmth. At 2:11 a.m., the house went silent again. The only sound was the ticking, that mechanical rhythm beneath the floor. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves. Mara sat awake on the couch, eyes fixed on the window. Outside under the streetlight, she saw them again. 3 small figures, perfectly still, their shadows stretching all the way to the porch. She blinked. They were gone. She looked down, and there, at her feet, just inside the glass, were 3 damp footprints. Each one pointed inward. Chapter 8. It was too cold for November. The kind of cold that didn't come from weather, it came from inside. Every window was shut, every vent sealed. But still, the temperature in the Grady house kept dropping, as though something beneath the floorboards was breathing out winter. Mara wrapped her robe tighter. The air fogged in front of her mouth. When she looked toward the kitchen, her breath didn't just vanish. It hung there, slow and heavy, like mist suspended in syrup. I can see my breath, she said softly. Finn looked up from the couch. It's because the house is remembering. Remembering what? He shrugged. Last time. The family had moved to the living room, a small island of light surrounded by dark hallways. The lamps flickered, dimmed, then brightened again, like the house was taking shallow breaths. Iris had set her phone to record on the coffee table. EVP session, she said, her voice shaky but determined. If they're still here, maybe we can hear them. EVP, Silas muttered. Iris, this isn't a horror movie. She hit record. Maybe it is. The phone's microphone picked up the quiet hum of the house. Then, faintly, beneath it, another sound. A whisper. Not one voice, but 3. The wrong street. We came home. Iris's eyes widened. Did you hear that? Mara covered her mouth. Silas snatched the phone, playing it back again and again. The wrong street. We came home. The words seemed to stretch, the syllables glitching at the edges, almost mechanical, almost rehearsed. That's enough, Silas said, voice sharp. Delete it. But Dad, delete it, he barked, slamming his palm on the table. The lamp beside him flickered violently once, twice, then shattered, sparks scattering across the floor. For a long time, nobody moved. Then Silas stood. I'm ending this. He stormed to the basement door. The others followed at a distance. The air grew colder with each step down. The light bulb overhead buzzed, barely alive, casting thin white light across the concrete floor. Silas grabbed his toolbox, what was left of it, and began prying up a loose floorboard near the furnace. Silas, Mara said softly, don't. They're not ghosts. They're not monsters. It's wiring. It's wiring. He drove the pry bar beneath the board and ripped it up with a groan of nails. Beneath it, another layer of boards, older, darker, warped from moisture. He tore that layer open too. What lay underneath wasn't insulation. It wasn't piping. It was machinery. Wires, copper coils, and old corroded gears tangled with something pale and fragile that looked like bone. Mara covered her mouth. Silas, he leaned closer. It's some kind of mechanism, like a... He stopped. In the center of the tangle was a small shape, a child's hand, perfectly preserved, metal jointed to bone. The fingertips were tiny screws. Silas stumbled backward, dropping the pry bar. No, no, no. Finn crouched beside him, eyes wide. They're part of the house. What? The kids, Finn said simply. That's how they remember. That night, nobody spoke for a long time. Mara tried to call the police. The signal died every time she dialed. Iris tried to upload the EVP to her vlog. The file corrupted into static before she could hit send. Silas just sat in the basement doorway, staring at the broken floor, whispering to himself. Finally, Mara went to him. We need to leave. He didn't look up. Leave where? There's nowhere to go. Yes, there is. We can drive. He shook his head. The car won't start. I checked. When? Every night since they came. Her throat went dry. And you didn't tell me? He looked at her then, eyes hollow. Because I didn't want to admit it was real. Iris couldn't sleep. She sat on the stairs with her phone flashlight on, watching the floor breathe. It wasn't her imagination. She could see it rise and fall just slightly, as if the entire house had lungs. She pressed her hand to the wood. It was warm. Not the warmth of heat, the warmth of life. She heard something beneath her fingers. A faint ticking. Then a slow grind, like gears turning. When she pulled her hand away, there was a smudge on her palm dust and something red-brown that looked too much like dried rust. The next morning, the cold was unbearable. Every window had frosted from the inside. The air smelled like old pennies and burnt sugar. The furnace had stopped humming entirely. Silas stood at the basement door, flashlight in hand. If this is electrical, it's in the subfloor. He descended the stairs. Mara followed, whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood. When the light hit the far wall, they both froze. A rectangular outline, faint beneath the concrete like a door that had been plastered over. What the hell? Silas murmured. He scraped at the surface with his screwdriver. The plaster flaked away, revealing old wood beneath. I thought the basement ended here, Mara said. So did I. He found the handle rusted metal, half swallowed by paint, and pulled. The wall creaked open like an eyelid, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. Air rushed up from below, damp, metallic, and cold enough to burn. Mara stepped back. Silas, don't. He aimed his flashlight down. The beam caught on metal railings, old wiring, something like a wheel or crank far below. It's not on the blueprints, he said. This wasn't supposed to exist. Iris appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand. Dad, what is that? He looked back, face pale. Something the house didn't want us to find. The beam of his flashlight trembled. Something glinted in the dark, a lock. Mara realized she'd seen that lock before. The shape, the color. The key, she whispered. Silas turned to her. What? She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small brass key they'd found in the tin pail, the one that had fit the cabinet with the old Halloween photos. It gleamed faintly in the cold light. Without a word, she handed it to him. Silas crouched, fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like grinding teeth. The mechanism clicked, echoed, and something deep below the house shifted. The air went still. Then a faint hum rose through the floor, through the walls, through the bones of the house itself, an ancient, mechanical sigh. Mara whispered, "What did you just open?" Silas swallowed. I think it's remembering. From above, Iris's phone began recording on its own. On the screen, text appeared, not typed, but etched across the image in static letters. We came home. We remember the warmth. Come down and see. The flashlight flickered once, then died. For a second, there was only blackness. Then from the stairwell below, a faint orange glow appeared, flickering like candlelight, like jack-o'-lanterns burning in a place where no one had lit them for decades. And somewhere beneath that light came the sound of laughter, tinny, distorted, and far too close. Chapter 9. The key turned with a sound like bone cracking underwater. For a moment, no one moved. The Gradys stood huddled around the narrow, splintered door in the basement floor, the brass key still trembling in Silas's hand. Cold air pushed upward through the crack, sharp enough to sting their eyes. It smelled like wet pennies and something old, something that had been breathing down there a long time, waiting for this. Iris lifted her phone, recording again. The tiny screen's light trembled over the uneven floorboards, catching dust motes that moved wrong, drifting in the wrong direction. "Dad," she whispered, that's not part of the house, right?" Silas didn't answer. He knelt, ran his hand along the jagged edge of the wood. The gap was rimmed with metal, not wood. It looked welded, not built. "No," he said finally. "No way this was here when we moved in." He tried the knob again. It gave. A click echoed deep below, and the floor seemed to sigh, like a lung finally exhaling. A faint light shimmered through the opening, greenish and wrong, as if reflected from under a lake. Then came a sound, a slow, rhythmic tock, 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 like a grandfather clock somewhere far beneath their feet. Finn whimpered, "I don't like the clock, Daddy." Silas looked at him and forced a smile that didn't fit his face. "Probably the pipes, buddy. Let's just see what this is." He tugged the door open. The hinges screamed like something being scraped out of a dream. The stairs beneath descended into gray concrete, slick and uneven, too narrow for comfort. A thin string of Christmas lights, old, half dead, was stapled along the ceiling, flickering pale green. They pulsed faintly, like veins. "Stay close," Mara said. She took Finn's hand, the flashlight in her other. Iris followed behind, camera on, the lens bouncing light over walls lined with... She froze. Wallpaper. Not brick or concrete, but wallpaper. Peeling yellow floral paper, curling at the edges, covering the cement walls like someone had tried to redecorate a bunker. Beneath it, when the paper flapped, she could see the faint shine of metal plating. "Why would there be wallpaper down here?" she whispered. "Because this isn't a basement," Mara said quietly. "It's a replica." The steps ended abruptly at a hallway. The air felt thick, muffled. The ticking was louder here, echoing off the metal in rhythmic bursts. Iris tilted her camera toward the left wall, and her breath caught. There was a door at the end of the hall. A familiar door. It looked exactly like their living room door upstairs. The same worn handle, the same scratch from when Finn ran his bike into it last year. Even the same keyhole. Silas walked up and pressed his hand against it. "You've got to be kidding me." He turned the handle. The door opened onto their living room. But not their living room. Everything was older. The couch was the same style, but the color had faded to dust. The pictures on the walls showed versions of them with different clothes, different haircuts. The clock on the mantel ticked, but backward, and on the floor near the TV sat 3 small effigies, roughly made from cloth and paper, each one wearing a tiny version of their Halloween costumes from years ago. Mara clutched Finn to her chest. "This isn't real." "Then why's it recording?" Iris whispered. "Because the TV was on." The screen showed grainy footage of their front door. It was looped footage of them opening the door last night for the trick-or-treaters. Clover's paper rabbit mask flickered in and out of the static. Then the screen changed. Iris's voice echoed from the TV. "Say hi, guys, trick or treat." But the camera angle wasn't hers. It was from inside the house. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. I filmed from outside." Silas stepped forward, searching the wires that snaked out from the TV. They disappeared into the wall. The wallpaper here pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Okay, we're done, he said. We're leaving. Now. But when he turned toward the hallway, there were two more doors waiting where there had been one, both identical, both leading to other copies of the same living room, visible through cracks of light. The brass key hummed faintly in his pocket. They went through another door. This room was worse. The wallpaper was newer, but the air was wrong, sweet and rot mixed together. Another set of effigies sat on the couch, these ones more detailed, with little bits of hair tied around their cloth heads. The faces were painted with red smudges shaped like smiles. The VHS player in this room clicked on by itself. The screen fuzzed, and a voice came through, warped but familiar. It was Iris's voice again, but slower, deeper. "When they come," it said, "don't open the door twice." Finn looked up at her, eyes wide. "You opened it twice." Mara turned, gripping Silas's sleeve. "What does that mean? What does that mean?" But Silas wasn't listening. He had moved to the wall, tracing the pattern of cables that ran downward, deeper. His fingers brushed something cold, metal, wet. He pulled the wallpaper aside, and behind it were bones wired together with copper, threaded into the walls like part of the circuit. The sound returned. The knocking. Not from above this time, from everywhere. Knock, knock. From the next door. Knock, knock. From the walls. The effigies on the couch shifted slightly, their heads tilting toward the sound. Finn started crying. Silas grabbed the brass key. There has to be an exit. He turned toward the hall again. Now there were 4 doors, each identical, each humming faintly. A low whisper filtered through the air, metallic and stilted like a recording slowed to half speed. "Wrong. Street." Iris pointed her camera at the TV. The feed changed again. Now it showed them, standing in this room, staring at the TV. Except the versions on the screen weren't moving the same way. The iris on the screen turned and looked directly into the lens, and smiled. Silas dropped the key. It hit the floor with a sound like a scream. The knocking stopped instantly, replaced by the faint sound of footsteps above, the real basement floor. "Upstairs," Mara said. "Something's upstairs?" But then came the other sound, the one they had prayed they'd never hear again. The doorbell. It rang once, then again, then a third time, each chime slower, wetter, like the bell was melting. The screen on the wall flared with static. The feed changed one last time. It was the front door, and on the porch stood 3 figures. Clover, Ash, Rue. Their costumes looked soaked, dripping black fluid onto the welcome mat. The paper mache faces were sagging, revealing glimpses of metal and porcelain beneath. Clover raised a small, dented tin pail toward the camera. The feed cut out. The light bulbs along the ceiling began to burst, one by one, sending the basement into darkness. Silas grabbed the brass key off the floor, clutching it so tight his hand bled. "Run," he whispered. "Run before they—" The front door slammed upstairs. Footsteps. Soft, careful. Inside the house. The Gradys froze. Finn whispered, "Daddy, I think they found the stairs." The clock stopped ticking. Then came the voice, echoing down the tunnel from above, distorted through metal and dust. "We came home." Chapter 10. The voice rolled down the stairs like smoke. Not loud, not shouted. Just true. Silas froze halfway up the steps, flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam hit the ceiling, and in the dust above, shadows moved where no one stood. "Stay behind me," he hissed. But Finn was clutching Mara's leg, whispering something too softly to hear. Iris's phone camera still recorded, its red light the only steady glow left in the house. The basement door at the top of the stairs creaked open just slightly. The sound wasn't wood. It was metal flexing, like the doorframe was breathing. Through the crack came the sound of feet, not walking, dragging. A slow slide, a shuffle, a wet cloth brushing the floor. "Dad," Iris whispered. She turned the phone toward the opening. The camera autofocused, clicking in the dark. For a split second, a shape flickered in the frame, white, tall, almost human, then gone. Ash. The tall one. Silas gritted his teeth. Stay quiet. They climbed the rest of the way in silence. When Silas pushed open the door, the house was dim wrong, as if the power were running through a different current. The bulbs hummed faintly green. The wallpaper seemed to shift between breaths. Don't look at the windows, Mara whispered. She wasn't sure why she said it, but her voice came out sure. She'd seen something there, a reflection that blinked when she didn't. They moved into the living room. The furniture was all slightly out of place, chairs angled wrong, clock turned backward again. The family photos on the wall changed. In one, Finn's eyes were open too wide. In another, Mara was smiling a smile she'd never made. And at the far end of the room near the hallway, 3 small wet shapes stood. Clover. Ash. Rue. They weren't moving, but their heads tilted in the faint light, like they were listening. The static sound began again. Not from the TV, this time from inside the walls. Voices caught in wires. Clover took one step forward. The paper rabbit mask tilted toward Silas. He raised the flashlight, the beam jittering over the mask's face, and for the first time Iris saw the crack. The paper was splitting down the middle. Something glossy and dark was underneath. The edge of a jaw made of porcelain, and beneath that, something wet and mechanical. A tangle of wire that pulsed faintly like veins. Jesus Christ, Silas breathed. They're not kids, they're... Clover twitched. The sound that came out was half a gasp, half a machine skipping. A child's voice buried in static. You opened the door twice. Then the other 2 moved. Ash's sheet dragged behind him, leaving a streak of black fluid across the carpet. Rue's clown mask flickered in the light eyes flashing too bright, like old camera bulbs about to explode. Their footsteps didn't match the floor. They hovered slightly, wrong in gravity, like film played at the wrong frame rate. Mara pulled Finn back into the hallway. Iris raised her phone, hands shaking, filming everything because she couldn't not. Stay back, Silas warned, stepping forward with the flashlight raised like a weapon. This is my house. He swung the beam at Clover. The light hit the mask, and for a moment, the face beneath flickered like static on a screen. Then the mask slipped. What was beneath wasn't human. Porcelain teeth in uneven rows. Glass eyes set too deep, both cracked like shattered lenses. Skin, not skin, more like molded wax, stretched too thin over machinery that still ticked beneath. Clover's mouth moved, but the voice came delayed, like playback on a damaged tape. Silas, Grady. Silas stumbled back, flashlight falling from his hand. It rolled across the floor, beam slicing through the darkness. Ash bent to pick it up. The light illuminated his sheet, torn duct tape and gauze, beneath which was a ribcage made of metal rods and something still twitching. He tilted his head, listening to the sound of the family breathing. Rue began to hum. A child's tune. Trick or treat. Smell my feet. Mara covered Finn's ears. Don't listen, don't. But it was too late. Finn whispered, They're cold, Mom. They said they just wanted warmth. Then the lights went out. The silence after was enormous. A static hum filled the dark, vibrating through the walls, the floor, the air in their lungs. Iris's phone light flicked on automatically. It caught Clover's mask, inches from her face. She screamed. Silas lunged, swinging the heavy flashlight. It connected with something solid, and Clover fell backward, head snapping sideways. A splatter of dark rust hit the floor. They expected sparks, but instead it bled. Thick, black, metallic-smelling blood that hissed as it touched the light. The wound whispered. A voice poured out of it, not through air, but through the electricity. Help us! We were left outside. It's so cold. We just want to come home. Mara dragged Iris toward the stairs. Go! Go now! But the shadows along the walls didn't move with them. They stayed still and then one by one started moving the other way. Upstairs, every window showed a different night. Different houses, different streets. One of them had a crooked sign that read, "At Eldritch Lane." Iris turned to her father. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling, "what if we're not home anymore?" Silas didn't answer. He was staring down at the flashlight, at the smear of dark fluid drying on it, which was slowly shaping itself into 3 tiny fingerprints. From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening again. The same dragging footsteps. The same small, static-laced voice. "Please, just for a little while." And then laughter. Childlike, hollow, close. Chapter 11. Iris woke to silence so complete it had a texture like wool stuffed into her ears. The air felt thick, unmoving. She blinked at the ceiling, expecting to see the soft blue flicker of her fairy lights, the faint hum of the heater. Instead, the ceiling was gray, uneven, and breathing. A long crack ran through the plaster, opening and closing with each soundless pulse. She sat up, heart hammering. "Mom?" No answer. Her phone was on the floor beside the bed, screen dark. She tapped it on no battery. But it shouldn't be dead. It had been fully charged before she'd what? The memory was fog. A scream, the flashlight falling, Clover's mask shattering, and then that voice echoing through her chest. "We came home." Iris swung her legs out of bed. The carpet felt damp, as though it had rained inside. She could smell it: wet leaves, iron, the faint rot of autumn left too long in a closed room. She opened her bedroom door. The hallway beyond was wrong. Narrower. The wallpaper had changed color, a faded, sickly yellow, curling at the seams. The family photos were still there, but their faces were smeared, blurred, as if someone had pressed a wet thumb over each of their eyes. "Dad?" she whispered. Her voice didn't echo. It just stopped, as if the house swallowed sound now. At the top of the stairs, light seeped through the window. Not sunlight. Something dimmer. Iris descended carefully, each step creaking under her weight, though she noticed, uneasily, that her reflection in the banister glass didn't move with her. When she reached the bottom, she stopped breathing. The living room had changed. Everything was where it should be. The couch, the coffee table, the TV, but all of it was older. Decades older. Dust so thick it muffled her footsteps. The TV was a square wood-framed box with dials instead of buttons. The air smelled of melted plastic and time. The curtains were drawn. The walls pulsed with a faint hum, the same electric rhythm as the trick-or-treaters' voices. She reached for the front window. Her hand hesitated before she pulled back the curtain. Outside was not Marin Hollow. The street curved wrong. A too-perfect semicircle lined with houses that looked like sketches of houses, incomplete, slightly off, windows the wrong size, chimneys at impossible angles. And the sky a permanent twilight orange, as though the sun had died trying to set. The street sign swung in the wind, rusty, letters scraped almost away. Eldritch Lane. Iris stared, unblinking, her breath fogging the glass. In the yard across the street, a jack-o'-lantern burned faintly. Its grin never flickered, and beyond it figures. 3 small shapes standing still in the middle of the road. Clover, Ash, Rue. They didn't move, didn't even sway, but their heads turned together toward her window. And then they waved. She stumbled backward, knocking into the coffee table. A VHS tape fell off and hit the floor. The label was smeared, but she could make out the words, "Feed them." The air around her grew colder. The hum in the walls shifted into something like static speech. She strained to hear. It sounded like a dozen voices layered together, whispering beneath the current. "Welcome home, Iris." "Stop," she said, clutching her head. "Stop it." The whisper stuttered. Then clear, mechanical, calm. Would you like to feed them? Her heart slammed against her ribs. No! The house shuddered as if it disapproved. She ran to the kitchen, every step sinking into the carpet like the floor was breathing with her. The kitchen tiles were cracked. The refrigerator door hung open, empty except for a glass jar, filled with what looked like dried leaves and something small and brass. The key! Her trembling hand reached for it. It was warm. As she touched it, a faint vibration ran through her palm, and a whisper, soft and close. We just wanted to come inside. For warmth. Iris dropped it, stumbling back. The refrigerator light flickered once, twice, and then the bulb blew, plunging the room into that sickly orange half-dark. Behind her, a laugh. Small, childlike, and very close. She turned slowly. Rue stood in the doorway. The clown mask tilted to one side, cracked down the cheek, the eyes behind it glowing faintly white. You weren't supposed to open the door twice, Rue whispered. The voice was raw, metallic, layered with Iris's own pitch. Then it smiled. She ran. Through the living room, up the stairs, slamming the door to her room and pressing her back against it. Her heart was pounding so loud she could hear it echo off the walls, except the echo was too slow. Off by a beat, like the house had its own heart, out of sync with hers. Something scratched from the other side of the door. Iris. It was her mother's voice. Mom? I found Finn. He's upstairs, sweetie. Come open the door. She wanted to believe it. God, she wanted to. But something was wrong. The voice had the right words, the right rhythm, but no breath between syllables. Like it had been copied, not spoken. Mama, please, Iris said softly, shaking. If it's really you, tell me what you painted on the basement door last summer. A pause. Then, home. Iris froze. She had painted the word home in white paint. But so had the other her, the one on this side of the mirror. The handle began to turn. She stumbled backward, tripping over her backpack. Her phone clattered out, screen still black until suddenly it lit up. The video app opened itself. Oh, the last recording she'd made played on its own. It showed the living room, her dad, her mom, Finn, and the trick-or-treaters standing in the doorway. But in the background, reflected faintly in the window, there was a second family. Smiling, pale, motionless. They waved. The static on the screen rose into a shriek. Iris dropped the phone. The door clicked open. The hallway beyond wasn't her house anymore. The wallpaper peeled into darkness. The air smelled like old rain and dust. And down the hallway, the three trick-or-treaters stood, holding their pail between them. The brass key rested inside, gleaming faintly. Clover lifted the pail toward her. You forgot to feed us, the voice said soft, overlapping with her father's, her brother's, her own. The lights above her buzzed, flickered, and burned out. For an instant before darkness took the room, Iris saw through the broken mask. Clover's eyes weren't glass anymore. They were mirrors. And in their reflection, she was one of them. Chapter 12. At first, Iris thought the darkness was absolute. But after a few seconds, she realized it wasn't. It was moving. Shifting like fog that had forgotten how to be air. Shapes floated in it, walls, furniture, her own outline. The house wasn't gone. It had just changed sides. Her reflection in Clover's mirror eyes still burned in her memory. That impossible version of herself, eyes hollow. Smile fixed, it hadn't vanished. It had waited. And now she was standing in its place. The air was colder here, but still. Not a natural stillness, the kind that feels held. Like everything around her was waiting for direction. She stepped forward carefully, The floor was smooth, but too smooth polished like glass. When she looked down, she could see the faint reflection of her own face. Except her reflection didn't match. It blinked a moment too late. And when she frowned, it smiled. "Stop it," she whispered, though her voice sounded distant. "You're not me." The reflection tilted its head, then reached upward, pressing a hand against the other side of the floor. There was a sound faint, like wet paper peeling. And then her reflection whispered, "We let them in once. You can still leave." The sound of laughter echoed down the hallway. It was Finn's. "Finn," she called, voice cracking. "It's Iris." No answer. Just that laughter again, fading between rooms. She ran. Each door she passed was familiar but slightly wrong. The kitchen door, the one to her parents' room. The basement, but the hinges were on the wrong side. The handles were inverted. She burst into what should have been the living room and stopped. Her family was there, but not alive. Mara sat on the couch, paintbrush in hand, eyes open, smile gentle but empty. Silas stood near the window, hand pressed to the glass, as if reaching for something. Finn was sitting cross-legged on the floor, his trick-or-treat bucket beside him, whispering quietly to it. They were all perfectly still. Not statues, not mannequins. Something in between. "Mom?" Iris whispered. Mara's head turned slowly, like it took effort. The sound of her neck moving was wrong, a dry click, like metal hinges. Her mouth opened and her voice came out smooth, calm, too practiced. "We let them in once." Then softer. "You can still leave." Tears stung Iris's eyes. She stepped forward, reaching for her mother, but stopped halfway. Behind Mara's reflection in the window, she saw another version of herself standing outside. The real her? The one still in Marin Hollow. That Iris looked terrified, pounding on the glass, mouthing words she couldn't hear. Behind her, the real Grady house, bright, safe, alive. "Please," Iris whispered, pressing her palm against the window. "Let me out." Her reflection tilted her head the other way. "The brass key," Mara said again, voice thinner now, fading. "Use it before the door multiplies." "What door?" Then she turned and saw it. There was more than one door now. Hundreds. Every wall was lined with them identical white doors, stretching into the shadows, each one faintly vibrating, humming with that same static undercurrent that had followed them from the beginning. Each door had a small brass keyhole. Each breathed faintly in and out, like lungs. The air shimmered with overlapping whispers. "Don't open twice." "We came home. Please, just for warmth." Iris reached into her pocket. The brass key was there, colder than ice. She turned it over in her fingers. It felt like it was pulsing with her heartbeat. She stepped toward the first door. Her reflection in the knob looked older, its eyes pleading. She turned the key. The lock clicked. She pulled. On the other side was the light. Warm light. The smell of her house, real paint, real air, real life. She saw herself standing in the living room, filming, laughing with Finn, her parents talking in the kitchen. Home. For a moment she smiled. I made it. But as she stepped forward, something caught her wrist. A small, cold hand. She turned. Rue was standing beside her, mask cracked wide open, nothing beneath but black space filled with whispering static. Just one more door, Rue said, voice overlapping with Clover's, Ash's, her own. Then it's our turn. Iris yanked her hand free. No! She ran through the door, but it didn't lead home. It opened into another hallway. And another. And another. Door after door, all identical, all humming with faint light. Every time she used the key, another door appeared. She finally stopped, out of breath, slamming the key against the wall. Please, just tell me how to get back. The whisper came from everywhere. Feed them. Her breath caught. Feed them what? Home. And then she saw it through one of the doors across the street. The real Grady house. Her parents outside shouting her name, running through the yard. They couldn't see her, couldn't hear her, but she could see them. The door's glass rippled like water. She stepped closer. The trick-or-treaters appeared again behind her reflection, faintly visible in the glass. They were smiling. Rue lifted a hand. Just one more door. Iris pressed the key into the lock. Her hand was trembling so hard she could barely turn it. Please, she whispered, just let me go home. The key clicked. The door opened, not outward, but inward. And the world folded in on itself. The last thing she saw was her reflection reaching back, grabbing her arm, pulling as the three children's voices merged into one final whisper. Now it's warm enough. The door slammed shut. Chapter 13. The Grady house looked almost normal the next morning. Almost. The jack-o'-lanterns on the porch had gone out, their smiles collapsing into waxy frowns. The plastic skeleton by the railing swayed in the wind, one arm dangling by a string. The candy bowl still sat on the steps, empty, except for a single melted chocolate coin. And inside, the family moved as though nothing had happened. Mara was making coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, strong and sweet, just the way Silas liked it. She hummed under her breath, something tuneless and small. Silas sat at the table reading the newspaper, though he wasn't turning any pages. His eyes moved, but not quite right. They seemed to drag a half-second behind. Finn was in the living room, stacking his Halloween candy in perfect, color-sorted rows. His jack-o'-lantern bucket was back in his lap. He wasn't eating anything, just counting, whispering numbers to himself. And Iris sat by the window, watching the neighborhood. Outside, the morning was pale and silent. The other houses looked a little too still. Curtains that never moved, cars parked where no one ever got in. She pressed her hand to the glass. It was warm. Too warm. A knock came at the door. A soft, polite tap, tap, tap. Iris froze. Mara called, "I'll get it," and walked toward the front hallway, footsteps even and steady. Silas lowered his newspaper, eyes unfocused. Who'd be calling this early? Mara smiled faintly, as if it didn't matter. Maybe someone left something behind. She opened the door. No one was there. Just a single brass key lying on the porch. That night, the neighborhood lights came on early. Porch bulbs flickered across Eldritch Lane one by one until the street glowed that strange orange-white that only existed on Halloween, though this wasn't Halloween anymore. Silas went around locking the windows. He whistled quietly as he did it, the same tune he used to hum when the kids were small. Finn sat cross-legged in front of the TV, watching static. It flickered, stuttering like fireflies. Every now and then faces seemed to move in it, but when Iris blinked, they were gone. Mara was upstairs, painting. Iris could smell the acrylic, the sharp tang of blue and black. She went up to check on her. Mara was painting the same thing over and over. The house, their house, each version slightly off. In one, the windows were too wide. In another, the shadows looked like open mouths. On the easel in front of her sat a final canvas blank, except for a brass doorknob painted dead center. "I like this one," Mara said softly, without turning around. "It feels finished." Later that night, Iris woke to the sound of the front door opening. She slipped from bed, heart pounding. The hallway was dark except for the faint blue glow of the TV downstairs. When she reached the landing, she saw Finn standing in the doorway, pajama-clad, holding his bucket. He was staring out at the street. "Finn?" she whispered. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. She came closer and froze. Outside at the edge of the lawn, 3 figures stood in the mist. They were small, child-sized. Each wore a mask, torn and melted now, but recognizable. A clock face, a mirror face, a grinning jackal. The same ones. "Finn," she whispered, "come away from the door." He turned, slowly, his face too calm. "They said we can play now," he said softly. Then he smiled. And for the briefest instant, his teeth caught the light, not white, but metallic. The door swung open wider on its own. A cold wind rushed in, carrying the faint smell of sugar and smoke. Mara appeared on the stairs behind Iris, brush still in hand. Silas came from the kitchen, half asleep. No one spoke. The three figures on the lawn lifted their heads in perfect unison. And then, with that same mechanical grace, they raised their hands and pointed toward the house. From somewhere deep in the walls, the old brass key turned. The locks clicked. Every light went out. And for a moment, just a heartbeat. The entire Grady family smiled all at once, in the dark. The next morning, Eldritch Lane was empty. The mail piled up. The porch lights stayed on day and night. And on Halloween the following year, when the sun went down and the wind picked up, 3 new trick-or-treaters appeared at the edge of the neighborhood. Their costumes were strange, old-fashioned, homemade, and perfectly still. They carried bright orange pails. When they knocked, their voices came out soft and metallic. Trick or treat.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, stay safe.